Good afternoon, everyone. I am Tammy Wilson. I am the project lead at the Sacramento County Office of Education for the California Dyslexia Initiative. And we are really excited to have so many friends and colleagues from California and other places join us in this learning opportunity. Welcome to the 2023-24 CDI Expert Webinar Series. This year, we're excited to learn more about the International Dyslexia Association's updated graphic on structured literacy instruction. And we're excited that we're going to be learning more about the content and the principles of high-quality structured literacy approaches grounded in the science of reading. To kick off the series, we are very excited to have Barbara Wilson. There is a lot of wonderful content to be explored in this webinar, and I know you'll learn a lot alongside of us. To support you, we've created a Padlet that will host the slides as well as handouts provided by Barbara Wilson and a webinar companion document that will include some discussion prompts and some additional resources if you'd like to learn more on this topic. The recordings will be posted on the California Dyslexia Initiative website within a few days, definitely by early next week. Next slide. The goal of the California Dyslexia Initiative is really to provide professional learning opportunities within the system of support in California to build knowledge, skill, and capacity around teaching and supporting students who are at risk for or with dyslexia, or those that are struggling with reading. We're delighted to partner with our friends at Glean Education to deliver this expert webinar series for the third year in a row and to build awareness of dyslexia across our state's educational stakeholders. It's my pleasure to turn the mic over to Jessica Hammond, founder and CEO of Glean Education, who is leading the coordination of these efforts for our webinar series. Jessica.
Thank you, Tammy. We are thrilled to partner with SCOE and the California Dyslexia Initiative to coordinate this webinar series for the third year in a row. For those of you who may not know us, we are Glean Education, and we partner with schools, districts, and states to deliver online training, web-based coaching, and school leader consulting. Our work aims to build educator understanding of evidence-based literacy practices to improve student literacy outcomes. Next slide, please. This webinar is the first in a series of webinars this year on structured literacy. If you haven't registered for them yet, we'll be popping registration links in the chat, so be sure not to miss them. Next slide, please. For this webinar, I am most thrilled to welcome Barbara Wilson. Barbara is the co-founder of Wilson Language Training, whose mission is to provide literacy curricula, professional learning, and ongoing support to educators across the country. She has worked to improve the lives of individuals with dyslexia for over 35 years, since her work at the Mass General Hospital Reading Disabilities Clinic, where she taught adults with dyslexia and authored the Wilson Reading System. In 2022, she was the recipient of the International Dyslexia Association's annual Margaret Bird Rawson Lifetime Achievement Award. Barbara is the author of 3 structured literacy curricula: the Wilson Reading System for students with dyslexia, Foundations for all students pre-K to 3, and Just Words for students with word level gaps beyond the elementary grades. Barbara is also founding member of the Global Implementation Society and is dedicated to implementation science. She co-edited a publication on the subject with an emphasis on how to bridge the gap between research, educational legislation, and classroom instruction. Barbara has been awarded honorary doctorate degrees from 2 Massachusetts institutions, Becker College and Fitchburg State University. Please welcome Barbara Wilson to the webinar.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Jessica. And it is truly my pleasure to be part of this series on dyslexia and literacy. It is something that is, as you heard, near and dear to my heart. And it's such an important topic in terms of how to help our dyslexic students achieve literacy. I am going to share with you this infographic and use it as a framework to talk about what are the key components to structured literacy, not only for dyslexic students, but for all students. And this map is something that IDA has had a few different iterations, but has really worked hard through several committees and people consulting outside of IDA to try to determine how can an infographic help people understand the comprehensiveness, I guess you could say, of a structured literacy approach. Before I get started, and you have a handout that you can refer to as we go through that has this map. Some of you, this might be new. Structured literacy might be new to you. And so hopefully in this session, I can give you a nice overview, very high level, quick overview of structured literacy. And then throughout the series that will be ongoing throughout the year, you can dig in a little bit more. So that's a goal for today. And those of you who do know structured literacy, my hope is that this map can help you in your future discussions and sharing out information about structured literacy. So as I go through it, it can perhaps give you a way to talk through some of the complexities of structured literacy. To get started, actually, structured literacy's beginnings come from work of Dr. Samuel Orton and Anna Gillingham. And they really introduced the idea of teaching students with dyslexia in a very direct and systematic way, the structure of the English language. And originally, back in the 80s, I want to say, and 90s, so 1980s and 90s, different programs were being published, including Wilson, that were called Orton-Gillingham-based programs. And the Orton-Gillingham-based programs, instead of calling it that, the International Dyslexia Association worked together with programs and the thinking of what is common features. And it was about the same time in the 1990s that a lot of reading research was coming out to say this is important for all students. And so the name Multisensory Structured Language Education, or MSLE, or just MSL, was used at that time to describe some of the common features that we now see in structured literacy programs. In 2014, the International Dyslexia Association had a board meeting and said MSLE doesn't roll off your tongue very well, and we need to think of a term that's easier to just kind of capture this type of teaching. And so they voted and approved to have the term structured literacy used. And clearly structured literacy has been adopted and is quite widely used now as a term. And so that's what we're here to talk about. What is structured literacy? And the IDA committees that said, you know, it seems to me that the term structured literacy is sometimes thought to be referring to phonics only. And as opposed to phonics only, it's much more comprehensive than that. Or it might be just phonemic awareness, and they might not understand that it's not only a what is taught, but how it is taught. And so that started out the thinking of let's try to create some kind of an info map that will help understand this comprehensive nature of a structured literacy approach. And so that's what I'm sharing with you today, in hopes to do that. And we start down the bottom here with the why. And the why is referring to the research, and it's the underpinnings. And that's why it's at the bottom of the map. It really provides the underpinnings of the research behind structured literacy approaches. And some people use science of reading interchangeably with structured literacy, but it's not an interchangeable term. It's really the foundation that informs what is in a structured literacy program. And so it's the scientific evidence that informs the content and the principles. And yes, it includes brain research and functional MRI research that tells us what's happening in the brain with reading instruction. But it also includes many other research that is really been compiled over the years, starting with the National Reading Panel, which I'm sure you all know in 1997 was formed to look at what the research was saying about reading instruction. And Dr. Reed Lyon is my hero. I think he's the hero of many people in the field because he was really the one to spearhead the looking at what was the research saying about teaching children to read with the publication in the year 2000. So here we are in the year 2023. And since that year that was published, there's been many research publications that have been peer-reviewed, replicated, and published and provide evidence-based instruction guidelines. And in fact, and I didn't get it in your handout, but there was a publication that came out, Petcher et al., called How the Science of Reading Informs the 21st Century Education, Informs 21st Century Education. And that publication came out 2020 and said that between the years 2010 and 2020, 14,000 research, validated, peer-reviewed research publications were printed about what we can do to help kids learn how to read. So there is a lot that we can base our instruction on today. And that is the compelling and promising evidence from this research that should inform a structured literacy approach. So coming back to the map, I'm going to get to the what and the how, but let's just first look at the top of the map, which is the who. And the who is really not only the who as the instructor who teaches structured literacy, but the who of the student. And structured literacy is appropriate at all tiers of instruction. So it's appropriate for all students in general education classrooms, as well as tier 2 intervention where kids need more practice, and tier 3. And don't worry about tiers. If you have more tiers than 3 tiers, that's okay, fine. The most important things is it's within a multi-tiered system of support. That structured literacy is very appropriate across all the tiers. In tier 1, high quality instruction for the entire class, we know prevents reading difficulty. And we need to get students proficiently reading right from the start. It also helps us identify those kids who are struggling. In tier 1 and across the tiers, this is effective for monolingual English-speaking children, as well as children whose home language is other than English. In tier 2 is really looking at those students, and we know there are plenty of them who need additional practice. And I like to think of tier 2 is practice, practice, practice with targeted instruction. And it's either pre-teaching or reteaching lessons from tier 1. And for those students who need to be identified as individuals with dyslexia, and with this series really focused on our students with dyslexia, it's very important to understand what's the difference in a structured literacy program in tier 1 versus tier 3. And in tier 3, and there's a little asterisk there that points down to the bottom of this map. And the language down at the bottom of the map says, for students with dyslexia and other reading difficulties, structured literacy must be delivered with more individualization and intensity and by a highly qualified instructor. And those words are very important for the success of the instruction with the student with dyslexia. And we know that, many times students are undiagnosed. Often brown and black students are not identified as dyslexic, and other students, all students who are dyslexic deserve to be taught by a highly qualified instructor, and so that they can achieve literacy goals. And you can teach them how to read with the right instruction. There's no doubt about it. The last thing I want to say about the tiers and the who across the top is that it's important to coordinate the efforts between these tiers so that students don't get confused. If they're in a tier 1 program and being taught with certain things with structured literacy approaches, but the tier 2 have a different way of approaching the same thing, but in a different way, then it might confuse your students. So Dr. Vaughn's work shows that it's best for students, and it makes most sense to coordinate those efforts between the tiers. So that brings us to the middle of the graphic, and the what and the how of structured literacy. I'm often accused of saying this is the most important thing. So forgive me for that, because then I go to the next thing and say, this is the most important thing. So I will just say it once today. And I promise that, because otherwise I would probably say it on every slide. But one of the very most important things about structured literacy is both the what and the how are equally important. Sometimes a teacher might say, I think we're teaching that already. We do teach that. And in digging in with the teacher, they are teaching some of the content or a lot of the content that would be taught in a structured literacy program, but it's the principles of instruction that are also equally important. And we'll be talking about that in a very broad overview today. But that is one of the key things to take away, that it's equally important to pay attention to both the what and the how in a structured literacy classroom. So let's first take a look at the what. And the what is that instructional content. And the instructional content integrates the domains of language as they pertain to reading and written expression. And I like to say, the term language is such a broad term, right? We know we have language that we take in, our receptive language, and those involve listening or reading. That's how we take in language. And then we have our expressive language, and we express language either by speaking or by writing. So, of course, the reading and writing parts of it are your written language, and the listening and speaking are the oral parts of language. So when we're talking about the domains of language, we're looking across all of these: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And we're specifically we're specifically teaching students how to manage and master the written language. And so this is a document that I recommend that is available from ASHA called Language in Brief. And it's just a really nice overview, quick descriptions of the language domains of phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. And then it goes and it provides a chart that just gives you an example of each of those different domains of language across the listening, speaking, reading, and writing aspects of language. So I encourage you to take a look at that and get that. The next thing I want to point out on this map is in this box, call out here, that looks at the two columns that the what is divided into. And one column is word recognition, handwriting, and spelling. And the other column is comprehension and composition. And looking at that, just word recognition, handwriting, and spelling, and comprehension and composition, you might be familiar with Hollis Scarborough's reading rope model, and you'll recognize word recognition and comprehension in the reading rope. Structured literacy isn't just the phonics part or the word recognition part. Structured literacy also crosses and includes the comprehension part. In addition, it includes the writing components of those areas. So it integrates composition and comprehension skills from the outset in a comprehensive and deliberate manner. So handwriting and spelling and composition as well. And those arrows indicate that you don't do just the first thing on the left and get everybody decoding and doing those foundational skills and then do the comprehension and composition right from the beginning. You're integrating both areas of instruction. And so we'll go through this side here and talk about the word recognition, handwriting, and spelling, and then go into a little bit more detail about each of those boxes below it. And I'm going to hold back saying this is the most important thing and say that what you teach for decoding, you teach for encoding. It's like two sides of the same coin. And so spelling is intimately related to reading. And so spelling, which is going from sound, you hear the sound, to the letter, strongly reinforces and helps reading, which is going from the letter to the sound. So right from the beginning, that two sides, sound automaticity is taught in two directions. And this is one of the keys when you're beginning in a structured literacy program. When you teach a apple a, you're teaching a student to look at the letter and come up with the sound. And conversely, hear the sound and come up with the letter. And so right from the beginning, you're working that in both directions. Additionally, talking about letters, there's an extensive body of research that shows the explicit and direct teaching of spelling and handwriting is required if all students are to master the mechanics of reading and writing. And with handwriting, students should be taught to efficiently write the letters. And so as they're learning the sounds, they efficiently learn how to write the letters. And so they're learning the letter name, the letter sound, and that letter formation all together. And the efficient writing of the letters not only helps to establish the alphabetic principle, that letter writing automaticity, with that, students can concentrate on more advanced writing components or writing aspects of writing. So those are the foundational skills, and the foundational skills of word recognition, automaticity is foundational to reading, and the handwriting, efficiency, and spelling, these are called transcription skills, and those transcription skills are foundational to writing. These boxes underneath that kind of give you some of the elements that are key to getting all those pieces in place. So the word recognition, automaticity, and the handwriting efficiency and the spelling require instruction in phonemes and graphemes, morphemes, syllable and stress patterns, and orthographic conventions. So starting with phonemes and graphemes, I'm going to just quickly do definitions here. A phoneme is that smallest unit of sound, and a grapheme is the letter or letters that represent that. And phoneme awareness or phonemic awareness is the ability to be aware of and consciously think about those phonemes or those phoneme segments in spoken words. What we know from research is that ability to decode words requires both phonemic awareness and the alphabetic principle. And the alphabetic principle is that linking of sounds to letters. This is one of the things that is as clear as can be with research. And so alphabet knowledge refers to familiarity with letter forms, names, and the corresponding sounds. Now, in terms of that relationship to phonemic awareness instruction is helping students tune into and understand those phonemes within a spoken word. So if they hear the word map, for example, map has 3 individual phonemes, app. With phonemic awareness instruction, it makes a stronger contribution to reading and spelling if students are also taught to, I'm going to use the word map, which is not intentional here, but if they are also taught to segment those sounds, hear those individual sounds, tune into those individual sounds, and then attach those sounds to the letters. And it's with that, moving from hearing those and tuning into those individual sounds, I think that's the better way to say it, and then mapping those sounds to the letters that are associated with the sounds. That is what's important for making the contribution to reading and spelling work. And so that link to letters is really important. This is sometimes referred to as the phonological awareness umbrella. And it's sometimes a little bit confusing, but this umbrella, I think, helps to separate the 2 different areas of phonological awareness. And you have phonological sensitivity and phonemic awareness as the 2 areas underneath phonological awareness, with phonological sensitivity being an awareness of larger language units. So, for example, word awareness is being aware of the spoken words in a sentence. That puppy is cute, being 4 words spoken in that sentence. And of course, syllable awareness, hearing a word, Wisconsin, and recognizing the different syllables in that spoken word. So those things under the phonological sensitivity are larger units of language. Whereas once you get to phoneme awareness, we're talking about awareness of the individual phonemes in the word that is spoken. Starting with just phoneme isolation, which would be in the word map, isolating the that first sound in the word map is an example of phoneme isolation. So that's right where you can begin when you are talking about reading and spelling instruction. You can begin your instruction with phoneme awareness right at that phoneme isolation level. And there's a lot of words on this page, but basically it's talking about how a meta-analysis has shown that you can almost get twice as much effect with its correlation to reading instruction if you link phonemes to letters in your instruction. So yes, they need to segment or hear those phonemes without the attachment to letters, but then by immediately also attaching it to letters, you're making that bridge across to reading. And this is a quote from the International Dyslexia Association fact sheet called Building Phoneme Awareness, Know What Matters. And it says, this approach is an example of an important concept of structured literacy. Student learning of foundational reading skills is facilitated by instruction that is integrated. And that integrated words in red, you're going to hear me talk about integrated a lot as I go through the session today, because integrated is central to structured literacy. And so this is a good example of integrated that coordinates the development of phoneme awareness, or the learning with the learning of letter and grapheme names and sounds. And that includes instruction in handwriting, along with practice writing the targeted letters. So all that instruction is extremely integrated. And this is the International Dyslexia Association fact sheet that I was speaking of, called Building Phoneme Awareness, Know What Matters. And it talks about the instructional keys to teaching this to students. Now, the other thing I just want to mention in terms of phonemes and graphemes and its relationship to phonemic awareness is that although there's different things within phoneme awareness instruction. The two that are specific to reading, most specific to reading, is the blending and segmenting. Oops, sorry. Blending and segmenting at the phoneme level are the most important skills, as they lead directly to decoding with the blending, and segmenting would lead to encoding for the spelling. So with these phoneme grapheme relationships, teaching kids how to do phoneme segmentation and blending with them, attaching it to letters, it really leads into the discussion of systematic phonics programs. And this, I think, is probably part of that common understanding of what is structured literacy, because structured literacy absolutely includes systematic phonics instruction. And it may be something where you are going from one thing and creating a sequence, and there's no one right sequence, but an important sequence of going from simpler to more complex. For example, here, 3 sounds without a digraph, and then 3 sounds with a digraph, like the word lash, 4 sounds, 5 sounds, etc. And then also needing a definite, cumulative, systematic sequence of teaching all phoneme grapheme correspondences or letter sound relationships, and then applying them to blending them into words and decoding words and segmenting them for spelling. The next box on the map talks about syllables, and syllabication training improves readers' ability to decode novel words, build sight word vocabulary, and helps with spelling. Very interesting study that looked at, with computer-aided analysis, that information about syllable type was most reliable on vowel pronunciation. So what does that mean? Well, there are different kinds of syllables, and directly teaching students about these syllable types, and the purpose that you're teaching the students about the syllable types is for them to understand that the type of syllable can help them access the vowel sound. As we know, A has lots of sounds. It says a, it says it says a, but when does it say a certain sound? And so teaching about syllable types can definitely help the student understand that. So, for example, teaching closed syllables, vowels in closed syllables are generally short. So if you teach the student keywords like a, apple, a, for the short sound of a, then teaching them about syllable types is going to know when to apply that sound to that word. Or a common pattern that is known is a type of syllable, that vowel consonant E, that E is silent, and that's when you get that long vowel sound. So instruction that emphasizes these syllable types in a systematic way, in a way that actually practices and really gets students to apply that within text, can help strengthen that word analysis. And we'd like to have a saying, schwa happens. And so it's kind of a fun saying, but it is also important to teach students about schwa. And I find a lot of times teachers are a little bit intimidated until they learn it themselves, and then it's fun to teach, so that students understand that in unstressed syllables, the vowel might not, and often does not, say quite the expected sound. Like in ticket, that E sounds more like a short I. And so we teach students directly about the schwa. So we know that teaching syllables really helps with that vowel pronunciation with many of the words. The other part that is going to help them with the pronunciation of vowel sounds is information about morphological prefixes and suffixes, and how this accenting or stress affects vowel sounds. So that brings us to the next box, which is morphemes. And morphemes are the smallest part of a word that has meaning. And a written morpheme is sometimes or is referred to as a word element. So a morpheme, when written, is a word element. And looking and helping students understand those word elements in words is a tremendous help to having them understand the structure of words for both decoding and spelling. And that includes teaching about roots, affixes, prefixes, suffixes, as the affixes, and doing this in a nice systematic way. That can begin right from the start. So sometimes people think of teaching morphological structure to kids as a more advanced step, but right from the beginning, students can learn about different parts of morphemes in the language. For example, teaching suffixes right from the beginning. S and ES comprise 31% of all suffixed words in English. And when you add ED and ING, it comprises 65% of all suffixed words in English. So you can get students underway with this understanding about word structure right from the beginning. With prefix instruction, prefixes, of course, are added to standalone words. So something like distrust is a good entree into prefixes, where you're showing students and helping students understand how prefixes can be added to standalone words. A more advanced concept to directly teach students is about when you have a prefix that's combined with a base element like rupt, often called a root, but that base element rupt added with disrupt is what is making a complex word. And those complex words account for approximately 60% of the vocabulary above a 4th grade level. So it's really helpful for students to understand this, especially as they progress through the grades. The last box over on that left-hand side is orthographic conventions. And this simply means teaching or instruction on the rules of spelling and correct letter sequences beyond the one-to-one phoneme grapheme correspondence. So what are the legal spelling combinations and patterns in the English language? So for example, saying being spelled with G, J, or DGE. Sorry, my mouth is getting tired. Let me grab some water here. So taking a look at that and knowing that orthographic instruction improves students' understanding of word structure. And so teaching students about those things. It's studying the rules that govern written language, like V doesn't end a word or when to double a word. Approximately 80% of monosyllables in English follow a set of rules, whereas about 20% typically only have one grapheme that deviates from these rules. So in a structured literacy program, you're going to teach students about that. And what you would talk about is what follows the rules in a word and what deviates. And usually it's only one part of the word that deviates in its spelling. The bottom box talks about integrated, and so that gets us back to the integrated. But what I want to point out with this box, integrated language reading and writing instruction, supporting automaticity, fluency, and proficient reading, I want to point out that as you're teaching all of those things I just talked about in that left-hand side, those foundational skills, you want to integrate it with reading text. So you don't just teach word structure in isolation. It needs to be practiced with decodable text. And this is true for young students just learning how to read, but it's also true for dyslexic students who never learned how to read, who are just learning how to read. They too need practice with decodable text, and decodable text means text that has in it the word structures that have been directly taught. And when you're doing this, you're also having students read orally. So they're orally reading decodable text, and that helps them make that link between what they're seeing, what they're hearing, and what they're saying. And Linnea Airy talks about orthographic mapping and memory and has coined those words. And she talks about the importance of oral reading to help that process of orthographic mapping and memory by having a student see a word, hear a word, and link it to its meaning while reading. So decoding and encoding, opposite process as we talked about, and it's the same thing for comprehension and compositional aspects of reading at the text level. So this brings us into that second column of comprehension and composition and the what that's there. So there's lots of evidence that we know, just getting right into the vocabulary and background knowledge, that reading comprehension is helped with instruction that includes orthography, phonology, and morphosyntax. And so that is what we've just been talking about, but with the morphology instruction, it not only helps the spelling, but it also helps students with vocabulary and even just word learning skills when they encounter a new word. Whenever you're in a structured literacy classroom, you want to think word structure and word meaning. So constantly linking the two, always thinking in both directions. This is another publication, another fact sheet to point out, written by Natalie Wexler about background knowledge, and talks about the importance of developing a student's background knowledge and combining systematic literacy instruction with building knowledge has a positive impact on both vocabulary and comprehension, and staying on topic so that a student can learn in informational reading about a topic and staying on topic and doing wide reading on that topic will really help them develop those background knowledge skills. I just want to mention to you here that this can be done by reading to students. So as important as we are working on the written aspects of language, there is a real role in the classroom, in a structured literacy classroom, for work orally. And one of those areas is definitely reading to students. And with older students who are dyslexic and can't access text at that high level, it's very important to read to them at that higher level and have them both listen to text being read and also retelling it. So listening and speaking to develop that background knowledge. And background knowledge also helps with multiple meanings like batter and batter. And you can work right in the classroom when you're doing structured literacy and teaching the structure of words and teaching them how to read batter and work with multiple meanings. Also with word knowledge, beyond background knowledge, you want to help students with this and things like semantic clusters. So you can help students just even orally with things that you do in the classroom to help them understand the difference between happy and content and over the moon, the phrase over the moon. So helping them with those semantic clusters. Syntax is, of course, rules that govern how words can be combined into meaningful sentences. And developing it and instruction in it involves helping students understand how sentences are built, how to expand sentences, how to combine short and choppy sentences, etc. And so when you're doing this and you're teaching students how words are combined to convey meaning in sentences, it also includes teaching punctuation. So for example, if you have the words, I find inspiration in cooking my family and pets, the meaning of that is a lot different than if you say, I find inspiration in cooking my family and my pets. And so you're going to help them understand this sentence structure in both grammar and punctuation, and the importance of combining. I want to quickly just talk about this, which is teaching students to combine intonation with appropriate phrasing. And that's going to help them comprehend what's being read. So the giant squid has finally been caught on tape. The rare species was filmed in its natural habitat deep in the ocean off the coast of Japan. You can really teach students, and by connecting with a graphical representation, it helps. And so who did what, where? So you can ask that question. You can also have students expand sentences. So if they did set a sentence, Sam and Dad made lunch, where did they make lunch? Here, who did what, how, where? And additionally, for fluency purposes, you can teach them longer phrases. So here, a subject and predicate phrase: Sam and Dad made lunch in the cabin. And so teaching them how to work with those longer phrases and teaching them sentence structure. And here it's just an example of teaching combining sentences. The puppy had fun. The puppy is cute. The cute puppy had fun. Next, in that, what is teaching structure? And everybody knows about teaching story graphing with narrative text. And this is very helpful for students, as is teaching informational text. So with expository text structures, you're going to directly teach description, sequence and chronology, compare, contrast, problem solving, and cause effect. And teaching those structures will help support comprehension as well as writing. And in fact, teaching each of these things are working in both of those directions: comprehension and composition. This last box is talking about critical skills. And with this critical skills, what we're talking about here is really helping students go more deeply, beyond the surface level. And it takes time and a real dedicated effort to do this in your classrooms. And I think this is especially becoming even more true in the age of digital text reading, where a lot of people skim text and don't do that deep reading. And so it takes a definite effort, and it involves things like helping them visualize and making sure they have a mental representation of what is being read or read to them, comprehension monitoring, being able to predict things, inferring things. And students really need to learn how to develop that coherent, it's called a coherent mental model. It's so important. It's not just having little facts that they can answer questions, where, when, how questions, and they can answer that, but they have a real coherent mental model. And there's a coherent mental model that needs to be developed for narrative text, like the characters and objects, and the informational text, which is the subject matter. So these things can all actually be introduced and fostered even before students can read themselves, through the work that's being done by reading to students and orally working with students on comprehension monitoring, etc., so forth, story structure. And that's true for your older dyslexic students too. So that brings us to the how. And I am looking at my time. I told you at the very beginning, the what is just equally as important as the how. And here I am with less time for the how. So I hope you trust that I absolutely mean the how is as important as the what. And you can really categorize the how into direct and systematic and mastery oriented. So those two different categories. Direct and systematic includes explicit teaching. Everything that you teach, you explicitly teach students very directly. So for the alphabetic principle, really teaching students to name that letter, use that letter name D. Often a keyword is used like dog to hear that and isolate that first sound to get that D sound. But there's explicit and systematic teaching. It's always taught directly and modeled and clearly explained. So for example, the rule about adding a suffix, when you add a suffix to a word that ends in silent E, if it's a suffix that begins with a consonant like S or L or F, because it begins with a consonant, you just add it. Whereas if you add a suffix that begins with a vowel, you drop the E and then add that suffix. So this is clearly explained in a planned way. It's not just as it comes up in the student's writing, so that students are taught it and practice it and learn it and master it. It's cumulative. And so instruction follows a logical sequence going from simple to complex. So like we talked before, blending 3 sounds before 4 sounds. At a higher level, the cumulative, this is a good example of cumulative as well. Before you can even teach that spelling rule, you want to teach students that some of your suffixes begin with a vowel, some begin with a consonant, and have them really internalize that, categorize that, know naming suffixes that begin with each, because that will make the teaching of that suffix rule so much easier. So it's cumulative, always layering on something new with what's already been taught. It's also multimodal. And this quote by Dr. Jack Fletcher, I think, is an important thing, trying to possibly move on, or not possibly, I'm going to say it's probably more beneficial to use the term multimodal than multisensory, even though multisensory has been used very much over the years. But all too often, multisensory was limiting people's understanding of that to think of things like sand in trays or shaving cream, and missing the key piece, which relates to simultaneously integrating different modalities. And I will refer you to this that's written by Dr. Jan Hasbrook, Understanding Multimodal Instruction, because she does a wonderful job explaining and, encouraging the term multimodal as opposed to multisensory, and explaining what's behind that and the important things of the multimodal work. This also, in this multimodal area, you can think of it also, and this is very appropriate for both dyslexic kids and students who are multilingual, helping them clarify what they're learning, clarifying verbal explanations with manipulatives. So this picture shows a teacher talking about the different ways that can be spelled in the middle of a word with manipulatives. The hopefully example is an example of that as well, clarifying verbal explanations rather than just using the words to explain it. Targeted prompt feedback. I just want to say it's got to be prompt, it's got to be specific, and it's got to be precise and concise in terms of what the student is doing right or what will help them move to a correction. And then data-driven. Structured literacy is data-driven right from the beginning. So universal screening will help identify kids who may need additional help right from the beginning. Diagnostic assessments while teachers are teaching students are going to help specify what can be done for instruction. And progress monitoring will help to see if the students are moving to what you want them to be at by the end of the year. Data matters. It's interactive, teacher-led activities, very important for motivation and engagement and focus and attention. So it's very highly interactive. You don't set the students off to be doing something and then go visit another group during a structured literacy lesson. It's highly interactive. And it is also scaffolded. And that relates to what I'm sure you've seen before, Gallagher's gradual release of responsibility, where the teacher models and then the student and teacher does it together. They work together with collaborative and guided practice. getting hopefully to the point where students can do it independently. Because of all of those things that are part of principles of instruction, what you have to consider is planning very carefully your instructional decisions on what are you going to do with text and what are you going to do for tasks. And it will depend upon the task, what kind of text you use. For example, you're going to use different text to read to the students than you are going to do with the students reading independently. I also put a picture there of a student at the computer because independent computer work really should provide structured practice, structured and targeted practice that is following highly interactive, explicit instruction. Rather than just having them go to the computer and do things independently, you really want that to be very specifically targeted practice following what's been taught by the student. So structured literacy lesson plans have daily activities that are ordered, precise steps and procedures, and rotations of activities. Okay, that brings us quickly to the last thing that I wanted to say on this map, which is purposeful. And I share when I talk about this map that really every word on this map was discussed at length, every arrow, trying to get as much on the map without being too overwhelming as possible. So if you look at this center picture, first of all, it has the student in the middle and student-centered. It's emotionally sound if done right. And the magenta color, I guess you could call it, is referring to the what. And the what is surrounded by the purplish color, which is the how. And so that's the center. And this graphic, which I also have shared with you in your handout, is IDA's kind of just the what and the how of structured literacy, with that student in the center. An approach that's grounded in the science of reading. So structured literacy is comprehensive, integrated approach grounded in the science of reading, should be done in a multi-tiered system of support. It includes the what, and keys to the what are letter knowledge, which is letter shapes, letter writing efficiency, grapheme phoneme relations, phonemic awareness, syllable structure, word parts, and the conventions of reading, and all of that done with text reading practice. And then comprehension and composition is background knowledge and vocabulary, teaching sentence structure and narrative informational text structure, and critical thinking skills. The how emphasize systematic and mastery-oriented instruction. And the how is beneficial for all students, but it's really, really essential for those who are struggling. And so it requires planned and purposeful choice of instructional tasks and text. And the last thing I'm going to say is it takes time, professional learning, and ongoing support, because there's a lot to it. It's very comprehensive for a teacher to master it, but it is so worthwhile for all students to achieve literacy. And that, I think, is the time. And I'm sorry I didn't leave time for questions.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much, Barbara. That was absolutely perfect. And I'll just ask you to forward to some of the ending slides so that I can share it. But yeah, continue. Were you finished?
Oh, nope. I was just going to say thank you so much, as this is the most important skill that we can teach our kids in school. Thank you.
Well, that was a lovely presentation and a wonderful overview to kick us off on this webinar series. Before you all leave, I wanted to mention the companion document that we've created to accompany each webinar. The webinar companion document includes prompts to discuss after attending the webinar and additional resources to further explore the webinar content. The companion documents and the recordings can be found at scoe.net/ca dyslexia. Additionally, the California Dyslexia Initiative is hosting a professional learning network on October 4th, 2023. This is going to feature a keynote by Jason Yeatman. Please register and join us for that morning of learning on Zoom. Next slide, please. The last thing we would like to ask of you is if you would kindly fill out this survey. It is so important for us to hear your feedback so we can continue to tailor our webinars to your needs. You can find the link in the chat or take a screenshot of that QR code and it should take you to the right place. Well, that's all the time we have for today, Barbara, but it was a true pleasure to hear from you. I want to thank you for your time on behalf of Glean Education, Sacramento County Office of Education, and the California Dyslexia Initiative. And thank you to our wonderful attendees who spend this time with us after their school day. We look forward to seeing all of you at the next webinar with Dr. Dale Webster and Dr. Carrie Thomas Beck on the what of structured literacy on October 12th, 2023. Please register for that event. The link is now in the chat. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.